Today on the Ask BP podcast, we're talking about how do I become a private lender? Stay tuned.
You're listening to another BiggerPockets Ask BP podcast, where you'll hear short, direct answers to your biggest real estate questions. Submit your question today on Facebook, Twitter, or the BiggerPockets forums by using hashtag AskBP. And don't forget to pick up your copy of the Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Real Estate Investing and other great content when you sign up for your free account at BiggerPockets.com. With that, let's get to the show.
Hey, what is going on, everyone? My name is Brandon, and you are listening and or watching the Ask BP podcast, the show that comes to you every day of the week and answers your direct questions about real estate. And so today's question comes from Marty from Goshen, Connecticut. And Marty's question is, Brandon, can you explain the process of lending money to others if you don't want to be a landlord, but you have extra cash that's currently earning next to nothing? All right, so today's topic on private lending is something that I would love to get into someday. Right now I'm in the growth phase of my business, but once I have all the properties I want, I definitely am going to get into the idea of private lending. So in preparation for this Ask BP episode, I did some research on this and read some articles, talked to some people who do private lending, and this is kind of what I came up with. So first of all, understand that private lending is the idea that you lend money to somebody for a real estate deal, and then you get a predefined interest rate. Just like I could go to a bank to borrow money from, I could also go to a private lender. In fact, one of the deals I'm working right now, I'm using a private lender, a guy out of California who lent me the money for the property, and then I'm paying him every month, a set interest rate and a set payment every month. And so he's earning a lot more money than he would maybe in the stock market or in a bank CD or just sitting in a bank account. At the same time, he's got his money working for him at a good interest rate, and I get to use that money, and it's cheaper for me because I don't have to go to a hard money lender, and I can use it a little bit quicker. I don't have all the closing costs that are associated with a mortgage. For me, it just worked out really well for private lending. So private lending is a very cool system that can help both parties, the lender and the investor. Now, you have to be very, very careful, though, when you are private lending for a few reasons. Number one, and most importantly, they could steal your money and run away to, I don't know, wherever, and just take that money and run, right? So you have to protect yourself. You don't just want to write a check to somebody for $100,000 and give it to them, right? That would be pretty sad and pointless. And so instead you have to protect yourself. And we do that through a lien position. Now, what is a lien position? A lien is a legal document that's on your it's on your title of your property. A mortgage is kind of like, the same thing in a way. I'm not going to go deep into that, but the idea is the lien is a document that's recorded at the county, usually at the county courthouse or the administrative building, when a property has a mortgage put on it. And the lien basically says that person has a claim to the property. So a lien basically gives you the legal right to foreclose on a property if something goes wrong, if the person doesn't fulfill their obligations. And so you could place a lien on the property, and they have different positions: first lien position, second lien position, and that's the order that things get paid off. So typically in a private lending situation, you want to make sure that you have first lien position on the property. Now, a title company can take care of that for you. An attorney doing the closing could take care of that for you, but make sure you have first lien position. It is possible to do it with second lien position, but that's a little more dangerous and risky because as a second lien holder, whoever has the first lien gets paid back before you do. But you want to be sure you're secure, and so you want to make sure you get paid back if something goes wrong. And so again, the idea that you're a private lender means that you want to be secure, you get that money back every month, and if something goes wrong, you can take the property back. Now, typically, let's use an example of how private money would work. Let's talk about that for a second. Let's just say you have a $100,000 loan that you're going to lend out, or $100,000 cash you're going to lend out, and we'll just say you're going to charge 10% interest. And you're going to charge interest only. That's most typical with private lending. Is very common, interest only. Doesn't have to be, but we'll say for this scenario. You have $100,000, you're lending out at 10%. Now, what that means is 10% per year on that $100,000. So 10% of $100,000 is $10,000. So in other words, if the person had the loan for 12 months, exactly 365 days, then they would be paying you $10,000. That works out to $833.33 per month. And so we went from a $100,000 loan, you could be making $833 a month. That's a 10% return on your money. Now, every month they keep paying you $833. you could do whatever you want with that money. I mean, unless you're investing within like an IRA or something, which is definitely a possibility, you could take that money and do what you wanted with it because it's your money. It's your profit. That's the money you made. Now, you could also just add it to your bank account and then lend it out in the future. That would be not a bad idea. And then at the end of the loan, whenever the loan ends, the principal, the person who borrowed the money, is going to pay back. And then at the end of the loan, the person who borrowed the money is going to pay it all back to you. So at the end, let's say they borrowed the private money to do a flip. They borrowed $100,000 to do a flip. At the end of the project, they sold it, and we'll say they sold it for $200,000. Good for them. Now, the first thing that happens when they sell that property is they're going to pay off the first lien, which is you. They're going to pay off the lien. You get your $100,000 back. You've also made that interest. So if they held it for a solid year, you had 12 months, we'll say, you made $10,000 on your money, and then you get the $100,000 back. So now you started the year with $100,000, you ended the year with $110,000. That is essentially how private lending works and why it might be something you want to get into. Because if you think about it, you're not being a landlord. You're not dealing with toilets. You're not dealing with tenants. You're not dealing with late rent. All those things that you normally deal with when investing in real estate, you don't have to deal with it. So private lending is really a really great thing. Now, of course, the one caveat is you have to generally have money. Now, there are people who raise money to lend it out as a private lender. That gets more into the hard money idea, which we're not going to really cover on this episode. But if you're interested in that, you can click this link right here to learn more about hard money lending. And so, what else we should talk about? So the idea of lending money, make sure that you have the first lien position. Let's see, what else do I got in my notes here? Interest. So how much do you charge for interest on a private lending deal? Typically, I see 6 to 12%, somewhere in there for private lending. Usually private lending is a little bit lower than what you might expect from like hard money, which is typically 10 to 15%. I usually see 6 to 12, and 12 being the very, very high end, with 6 being the pretty low end. But honestly, everything's up for negotiation. If it works for one party, maybe it works for the other, then it works. I mean, if that's 13, if that's 5%, if it's whatever, but typically I see 6 to 12%. I think the idea for a private lender is, well, the stock market has typically returned about 6% over the past 100 years or so. I mean, maybe 8% if you wanted to, depends on what chart you look at. But as a private lender, I like the idea of lending. If I wanted to lend, if I was a private lender, I'd like the idea of lending on real estate to earn about what I'd get on the stock market, if not more. Also, because I get real estate, I understand it. Most private lenders were real estate investors at one time, because they get it. They understand that if something went wrong, they could foreclose, take back the property. For me, that's a lot more secure than having to invest in a company who's based out of California and board of directors is in New York City, and I don't know anything about them other than their numbers seem good. That makes me nervous. But the idea of private lending seems more attainable to me. It's a little bit more work, but I just feel more secure in doing it. And so that's kind of what the benefit of private lending. Now let's see, what else do I got? We talked about that. Let's talk about loan to value real briefly. The idea of how else do you secure yourself? Well, you don't want to lend too much. Now, it's up to you how much you want to lend, but let's just go back to the example we said earlier, the $100,000 that you lent out. What if the guy bought the property for $50,000? And what if the guy wanted to put $50,000 in for rehab costs? That's $100,000. The problem with that, of course, is that what if the guy took the $100,000, he bought the property for $50,000, and then he walked away with closing with a check for $50,000 in his hand from you, right? And then he goes to Vegas, puts it all in black and loses it. What happens to you? Now, you have really no choice, right? I mean, he doesn't pay, he disappears, he's like, never mind, I don't want this deal anymore. What can you do? You can foreclose? Okay, great. You just foreclosed on a $50,000 house that you could probably go and resell for 40 or 50 or maybe 60. Either way, you lent $100,000 on that. So it's dangerous. The problem with that is you lend higher than what the property could be sold for. So you lose a lot of your stability and your security because the person had a too high of a loan to value. In fact, you were lending a much higher loan to value than you probably should have. Now, I'm a borrower often, so I would love private lenders who wanted to lend me 100% all the time. But as a person teaching you guys how to do private lending, that's probably not always the best idea unless they have a really rock solid reputation and you have a good relationship with them. So what should you do? How much should you lend? Typically, I would say look at lending anywhere between, 50%. Typical is 50, 60, 70% maybe of the after repair value. So going back to that example, let's just say that the after repair value, when it's all fixed up, said and done, is worth $200,000. And you are going to lend 50% loan to value. Okay, so you can lend up to $100,000. Now, the reason that I say that is because at least then you could sell the property. You could fix it up yourself if you needed to and sell the property for $200,000 because you figured out the after repair value was $200,000. You might even make money that way. And so, but if the after repair value was $120,000, well, now you don't have a lot of wiggle room because you'd still have to do the renovation and all that if something bad happened. So typically what I see is usually 65, 70% loan to value to get a property. Now, maybe that does include some of the repair costs. And if it does include repair costs, you may want to make sure that the borrower does the work first and then you reimburse them as work gets done. That would also help protect you. So when you're private lending, you just want to be protected. That's a really important thing. And then also one thing to keep in mind is the idea of a time frame. How long do you want to lend on? Some private lenders will lend for a year, some will lend for 2 years, some will lend for 5 years, some will lend for 30 years. It really depends on your goals, what you're trying to do as a private lender, how long you want to go for. So make sure you define that ahead of time and make sure that the person you're lending the money to is okay with that and understands that and has an exit strategy. As part of your homework you'll do as a private lender, making sure that the loan is going to be as solid as possible. Also, talking about the borrower, make sure that you've investigated them. Make sure they have experience in what they're doing, that they're not brand new. If they are brand new, make sure that you're even more conservative in your numbers. Make sure you've watched everything carefully. Make sure that you can check their credit if you want to. You can verify their income if you want to. You can be a bank. You can do whatever you want to do to make sure that you're secure. Maybe require them to come up with more money out of pocket, a larger down payment. Think of how a bank would think, and that's how you're going to think because essentially you are the bank. So with that, let's get to today's success quote of the day, and that comes from Abe Lincoln, good old Abe, who said, "Always bear in mind that your own resolution to succeed is more important than any other one thing." Thanks, Uncle Abe. Love that quote. So let's get out of here. Remember, in pursuit of your dreams, goals, and your aspirations for real estate domination, don't just learn, but take action. For the Ask BP podcast, I'm Brandon, signing off. Next lien, they could put other kind of liens, but Charlie, lay down, sit. Good boy, good boy. He learned to sit.
You've just heard another episode of the BiggerPockets Ask BP podcast. Submit your question today on Facebook, Twitter, or the BiggerPockets forum by using hashtag AskBP. And for more incredible real estate investing tools and education, including a free download of our book, The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Real Estate Investing, head over to BiggerPockets.com and sign up for your free account today. We'll see you on the next show.